Hey guys, in this video I'll walk you through a student management system that I've already built using Python and CSV files. There's going to be no external database, no ORMs and no frameworks either. So we'll break down the code, understand how each part works, and then run the program to see the complete CRUD flow. So allow me to give you a quick overview of our entire project. First, we're going to have 4 files, that is constants, database configuration, main.py and operations. Okay, so our constants is going to have 3 global variables kept ready so we can use them as and when we need. Okay, and notice the first line, that is file name equals students.csv. Now inside our database configuration file we have 2 functions, that is initialize file and generate id. So initialize file is going to basically make use of the file name that we have inside our constants and initialize that file. That means that when we execute the initialize file, we are going to have a 5th file named students.csv. Okay, and initialize file is the first function that is executed in our main method. So as soon as we execute the main method, a file is going to be initialized and is going to be created as the 5th file that we have in our project. Okay, now inside database configuration file we also have another function called generate id. Now generate id is responsible for creating or auto incrementing a new id for every student that we insert or append to the list. Okay, now inside main file we have an infinite loop where we are containing a menu driven system. Okay, so our menu driven system consists of the 4 operations, that is to add, view, update and delete each student. Okay, and in our operations file we're going to obviously have our CRUD operation functionality. So notice that we have I have mentioned what CSV files is like. It's a comma separated values file, and it is used to store tabular data in such a way where each line has the same number of fields. So each line of files is a record and CSV uses a comma to separate the values. And in our database configuration file we have imported OS or operating system, which is used to interact with the file system. So it helps you to check if a file exists or create directories and handle the file paths. So in this case we are using it to manage where our CSV file is stored, while the CSV module actually handles reading and writing the data. So the objective in this program is not to replace databases but to understand how CRUD operations actually work at a fundamental level. So how data is written, read, updated and deleted manually. So we'll be covering how to use CSV as a lightweight persistence layer, how to implement the CRUD operations, and more importantly the limitations of this approach and where it breaks in real world systems. By the end of this video you won't just know how to write CRUD code, you'll understand what your database abstractions are doing behind the scenes. Now coming back to our main method, which is the entry point of this application, we first initialize the CSV file to ensure that our data store exists. Then we run an infinite loop to display our menu and user input choice. So inside a try exception block, when we developers have introduced this statement inside the try block, that means that we're going to try this out, and if there are any exceptions we handle them in the exception block. So basically whatever we have inside the exception block are called handlers. So those are the set of instructions or set of code which is going to be called handlers because they handle the exceptions, okay, the edge cases of what we try to achieve. Now say a user has given an input like ABC, so we come into the exception block. Why? Because ABC is not an integer value. So value error here is a subclass of exceptions, and exception in turn is a subclass of base class exception. So that is the parent of all exception classes, and inside the exception block we have print invalid input to let the user know that we are not going to go forward because you have provided an invalid input. And then finally we go for continue keyword. So without continue it would just proceed to the next lines of code, but in that case choice would never be assigned, so that should give us an error. Okay, but with continue it skips this line and continues to the next lines of code, which is the match case to the next iteration. Okay, so I'm just going to run this to check if we get an error, and I'm going to comment it out so that we intentionally get an error. And I'm going to open this file structure so that when I execute this command, we are going to see that the initial file function is going to be executed. Okay, and that's going to create our fifth file, which is students.csv. So as soon as I hit enter, it's going to create a fifth file, that is students.csv, and it looks something like this with the fields kept ready. And I have entered no data yet, so ID is currently having no data, name no data, and none of these that follows. Okay, there is no data, this is just the fields, just the field names. As soon as I enter the data, this will get updated. Okay, but we'll come to that in a few seconds. And alright, so I have to provide ABC to intentionally give a incorrect choice, right? Now we get a name error. Why? That is because name ch is not defined. Okay, so ch choice was not assigned, so that is the reason why it goes into the next few set of instructions, but it gives us an error. But say if I uncomment it, run it again, and give it the same input, now this time it's continuing back into the menu driven system, and it skips this print statement. Okay, and we're just getting invalid input, which is what we have in the exception block. So what we're trying to achieve is not being achieved correctly. Okay, so inside the exception, which is handling the exception that we have in case of errors, or in case of edge cases, we handle it with the print statement invalid input, and that is what is being displayed in the terminal. Okay, so this is how we build scalable and robust applications using try exception blocks. Alright, so based on the input that we provide, we use match case to route the respective CRUD operation: add, view, update, and delete. So, and the loop keeps running until the user explicitly chooses to exit. Okay, so now we come to the database configuration file. Initialize file defines the function responsible for setting up the CSV file if it doesn't already exist. And in this line, we check if the CSV file already exists in the file system. So if it exists, we do nothing, and if it doesn't exist, we create it. So this prevents the overwriting of existing data. Okay, now in mode, in line 7, we have mode equals W. What does this mean? So we have three modes where we're going to use here, that is W, A, and R. And right here we have W, that means that we are going to create or overwrite the file. And A mode, that is if this was in place of W, it was A, then it would append data without touching existing content. And we have R, which means that it's strictly for reading. Okay, it will fail if the file doesn't exist. So we have to make sure that when we're using the R mode or reading mode, we have to make sure that the file already exists. It fails if it doesn't already exist. Okay, now we use open function, which opens a file and returns a file object, and using as file, we store that returned object from the open function, or assign the returned file object in a variable called file, so we can work with it in the future. Now we haven't given it, file is not a built-in variable, it's a user-defined variable. Okay, and the with statement ensures that the file automatically closes after we are done. Now inside open function, we have three parameters, that is file name, which is going to be students.csv. Okay, and we're going to have mode, which depends on what mode we're going to operate on that particular file. And as I said, we're going to have three modes, and initialize file is going to have the mode W. That means it creates the file if it already doesn't exist. And we're going to have new line, which prevents extra blank lines in the CSV file. Now in the next line, we have a writer equals csv.writer file. Now that means that we create a CSV writer object, okay, right here, which will allow us to write rows into the file in a proper CSV format. And here we use that file to create a CSV writer object, and that allows us to write rows into the file in proper CSV format. And in this line, we write the first row of the file, which are the headers or the field names. So as soon as the function initialize file is executed in our main, right, it creates a headers in our CSV file before we enter any data into it. Okay, so this defines the structure of our CSV file. Now in generate ID, so this is going to be our base case for our ID generation. And right here we check if the file exists, but if there is no data, then we just start the first record with the ID 1. So we return 1. Okay, and in this line we open the file with reading mode. Okay, so R is reading mode, and if the file doesn't exist, say, then it would crash, which is why we handled it with OS path exists. That means that if we go for reading mode, we have to make sure that the path exists and the file has to exist. Okay, and right here we create a CSV reader object, and csv.reader function basically converts the file data into iterable of rows. Okay, right here. So each row becomes a list of strings, and we assign that to a CSV reader object. So in next reader, it basically skips the header row or moves the iterator forward by one row, and it's always going to be the header row. And that's because every time you call this function generate ID, it's going to open that file and the pointer restarts to the start of that file. Okay, right here. And then we have CSV reader. That means it's going to start from the very beginning. And then we're going to have next reader, which is going to skip that line. So it's always going to be the header line, and each time you call generate ID for every single student, a new ID is going to be generated and going to skip the header line always. Okay, and then we have a list of instructions where we're going to assign each ID to a list of IDs, and right here for each row or for each student item details, reader here is a bunch of iterables. Okay, and for each item student, we're going to check if row, that means it skips empty rows. Okay, and we're doing a typecasting here, and we are turning that row ID for that particular row, the first row 0 means for the first column, that is ID, we're going to turn it into from a string to an integer. Okay, and we're going to assign those IDs to the IDs list. Okay, and then we're going to check that what the max value of the IDs. We're going to use the IDs to check the max value. So max of IDs finds the highest existing ID, and the default 0 means that if the list is empty, then we treat the max value as 0. Okay, and the +1 is the increment to get the next ID. So we're basically starting to enter IDs into every new line each time we add a new student data. Right, now we go to operations, and here we have the first function as add student. Now in our add student function, we're going to first start with opening the file name that we have imported from constants, and we're going to have append mode so that new data is added at the end. Now nothing that already exists is being modified or overwritten, right? So csv.writer is going to wrap the file object with a CSV writer interface so it's able to handle proper formatting. Then we create a new ID, we generate a new ID, and we print it out so that the user knows that which student is going to be added to or assigned to which ID. Okay, and then we enter the name and roll number, and we initialize marks as an empty list, and the list is going to contain string value of marks. Okay, so the marks is not going to be of integer type as we enter, it's going to be of string type. And then we iterate through subjects like we have with file name from the file constants, and subjects is going to hold physics, maths, and computer science, and we're going to iterate through subjects to enter the mark for that corresponding subject for physics, maths, and computer science. Okay, and then marks is going to be appended to that list marks that we've initialized right here. Thereon we're going to have a base student fields, that is ID, name, and roll number, and the marks is finally going to get appended or concatenated to that list, to the base students field. Alright, then write row is basically going to convert the list into a CSV row and write it to the file. So basically what we're trying to achieve here is opening the file in append mode so that new records can be added to the list or to the file at the end, and then we create a CSV writer object to handle the formatting. And finally, after inputting all the values, we have to combine the student details and marks into a single list and write it as a new row in the file. So I'm just going to append a new student, and I'm going to open students.csv, and currently it is empty, so I'm going to add a new student, and as soon as I add the new student, it's going to show up here. All right, so I'm going to type Dion and roll number 1 or 10, say. Marks is going to be 56 for physics, 89 for maths, and 90 for computer science. And we have successfully added a new student. All right, and this is going to show up here. So this is going to be our marks. This is for physics, maths, and computer science, and 10 is my roll number, and that's my name, and this is going to be the first ID. Okay, ID 1, right? So we have generated an ID 1, and we have assigned a roll number 10. All right, so now I'm going to come to get students. Now to display all the students, we first start by opening the file, and like we have done in as student and for every other operation, and gone for read mode, right? So to be able to perform the read mode, I need to first ensure that I have initialized the file. That means the file needs to exist. So that is the reason why I initialize the file in the very beginning before I perform these 4 operations. So read mode ensures, or we have to ensure that before we go for read mode, we need to have the file already existing in hand. Okay, and then we have created a reader CSV object, or CSV reader object, that is basically going to create an iterator over the CSV file. Okay, like I've stated while we were creating a new generating a new ID, and in that CSV file each row is returning a list of strings, and header equals next reader is going to read the first row only. So header is going to be the first row, that is going to be the header field, right? And rows equals list reader is going to read all the remaining rows and convert them into a list. So after next reader, the pointer moves forward, and list reader consumes everything else, basically all the data, and then we check if the rows have some data in it. Good, we move on to printing it, and if it doesn't have any rows, then we just print out the statement and return from the function. Okay, so and if we return, none of these statements are executed in that case. And this is basically our way of displaying the data. So the way I'm going to read this is, first we come inside join function, and inside join function we have for each column in the header, we are going to convert each column to uppercase letters. All right, so all our columns are basically our headers are going to be in uppercase letters and separated by this tab separator. Okay, and this is basically going to be our line separator, so that our display looks better. All right, and we check for we basically loop through all the rows that we have, the rows of students, and we're going to have a tab separator dot join row. So each row is going to be each data in the row is going to have separation with a tab. So I'm just going to display them and see how it looks to view students, right? So we're going to have this tab right here. Okay, and our data looks somewhat like this. So you might be wondering why the tab here is inconsistent with the tab here. That is because we have to maintain for each tab, it needs to start at the same column, right? So this program is smart enough to understand that the tabs that we provide, if we have a double tab, then even that would have been maintained. All right, so it's a way of displaying this data.